If you don't know what The Witcher is, why are you here? Not on this video, I mean, on the planet. The Witcher is a massive multimedia franchise, originating in a series of short stories and then novels by the Polish author Andrzej Sapkowski, which then inspired a series of video games by CD Projekt Red, and more recently, a Netflix series by the same name that is just about halfway into production on its third season. Though the cast and crew are rightfully quick to claim that The Witcher is a very different beast, for many, this attempts to fill the void left by the stunning decline and absence of Game of Thrones. 4 seasons of some of the best television ever made in a setting that we don't often see done so beautifully turned into, well... Reportedly, Jeff Bezos said that he wanted his own Game of Thrones in the Ring of Power series.
Your neighbor gets a vibrator that plays "O Come All Ye Faithful." You want to get one too?
So it's not out of the realm of possibility that Netflix had the same thought. So they got the rights to produce this series based on the books. Like a lot of people, I came to this series via the games, specifically Witcher 3. It was my first encounter with Geralt and this whole universe, and it immediately set itself apart from other games that I was playing with this atmosphere and soundtrack. I had fallen out of love in some respects with games. I'd been in a 2-year funk with Grand Theft Auto 5 and Skyrim, just this endless loop, and they're great games to be sure, but The Witcher 3 really ignited something in me, a new love for gaming, and realizing the ability of games to tell a sophisticated and emotional story. And then The Witcher promptly ate my life. And it did that without me having to play the previous games and without having read the books. Since then, I've fully played through Witcher 3 probably 4 times and the DLC. I've read the books twice. I've bought posters, shirts, hoodies, statues, soundtracks. I was fully absorbed into the continent. I have a sticker that came with the game on the back of the laptop that I'm recording this onto. I'm a fan. By the way, if you want an in-depth of my experience with The Witcher, check out my buddy's podcast, Game of Your Life, where we talk about The Witcher 3, and the link will be in the description. And so, like a lot of people, when I heard that Netflix was producing a series based on the books, I was fucking stoked. I followed casting announcements, I followed the writers and showrunner Lauren Schmidt-Hissrich on Twitter. I was fully invested in a show in a way that I hadn't been since... And it was only in pre-production. I was excited to see these stories of gray morality and compelling characters fleshed out for screen, and when Lauren Schmidt-Hissrich said that her appraisal of the saga was about being a dysfunctional family, I thought that was right on the money. She made a series of posts that made me very hopeful. Beginning in 1999 with The Sopranos on HBO, the idea of prestige television was born, and we entered another golden age of television, and depending on who you ask, were in it or just left it recently. Big screen actors were doing shows, whereas before there had been a divide. There were deep, complex stories that could be fleshed out further than a movie. They were almost live-action novels, and this was brought on by premium cable like HBO and later streaming platforms like Netflix. Some of the best stuff is being made now, and so I was excited. December 20th, 2019, the first season was released on Netflix, and it was okay. There were a few changes I didn't love, but overall was pretty good, and I do not envy them the task of having to adapt short stories and novels, and likely due to Netflix's mandate, in 8 one-hour episodes. And again, between seasons, followed accounts, kept up with casting, but I was a little guarded. My hype was a little tempered. When Season 2 finally came out, it took me a long time to get through it, and Long story short, fuck StruckTube, don't buy from them. The first episode was actually pretty good. It followed the story closely and had the addition of having Siri in the story, whereas in the original she wasn't. It was a good change and worked for the theme of the story, and it added a little sweetness and likability to Tormund. Sorry, Nivellen.
They are turned into monsters to kill other monsters.
That's not going to happen to her.
But it happened to you.
The rest of the season was not good. The plot is unrecognizable, and for the record, I don't want a one-to-one adaptation of the books. Television and novels are different media. They require different skills to produce, and an adaptation is not a translation, it's an interpretation.
This is not a room for repudiation or condemnation over string cheese appropriation accusations.
It is the original text filtered through the lens of a producer, showrunner, writer, network, and actor. And it's disingenuous to say that book fans are upset because it's not a one-to-one replication of the novels. Some people say if you want the books, then read them. This is something different. No, like I say, and like Schmidt-Hissrich said herself, this is supposed to be a faithful adaptation. If it's its own thing, then why would I want to see poor quality retreads of passages that I've already read? Why would it be marketed as an adaptation? You take an existing IP, you have a built-in fan base, you have a modicum of expectation from the audience. Period. I don't think this show is the worst thing ever made, but it definitely hurts a little because of the huge amount of wasted potential. This series could have been so much better, and it's a shame that it's not. I would be remiss, however, to address the deep divide in reviews. Some say it's great, that it's compelling and emotional television, and give 5 stars. I am not one of those people. Then there are some who think it's absolute irredeemable garbage. Some hate that there are black people in it, and that it's hyper-woke television. I am definitely not one of them either. Because I believe it could have been so much better, to that end, I have written and made this monster of a critique. If you want to see other good critiques or in-depth plot, costume, or other reviews, check out X Latalis, Jill Barrup, Just Julie, Costume Co., or Witcher George. There are also 2 really fantastic videos, much shorter in this, and quite frankly, make this thing I wrote look like dog shit. Those are What Makes a Good Adaptation from Plays the Thing, and How to Fail at an Adaptation from the Closer Look. Both of them focus on the first season, and even 2 episodes in the first season, but they're really good and I wholeheartedly recommend them. I plan to flesh out ideas that have been touched on before, addressing the adulation of show fans and the criticism of book and game fans. Social media only provides so many characters or so much time, and people are less than eloquent. Please understand, I'm not trying to dissuade you if you like it. I'm not trying to yuck your yum.
I don't want anybody to have the worst day at their job.
My position is essentially, if you were to take it as its own entity and remove it from the context of the books, the writing is simply not passable. The dialogue is clumsy, and the character development is uneven, and the pacing is all over the place. As an adaptation, it fails horribly, creating too much original content, removing key emotional character development, sacrificing screen time of primary characters, violates its own ham-fisted themes, which should be pretty easy to get right because they're laid out pretty plainly, and sometimes breaking its own internal lore, continuity, geography. But there are some things it does well. So let's clarify what this isn't. This is not an attack on any one person. Whether you agree or not, I have to give props to Lauren to engage with fans at all. Social media, Twitter in particular, and fandom in general have amplified criticism and even passion to dark levels and vile insults that I personally am not comfortable with and disgust me. I don't care how betrayed you feel tweeting death threats to Kelly Tran because she played a Star Wars character you didn't like in a movie you didn't like in a horribly overrated franchise you claim to like, or tweeting dick pics to the God of War developers because they haven't given you a release date yet is despicable, sociopathic, and reveals very unpleasant things about you.
You don't need mutations to strip men of their humanity.
This is also not one of those videos simply asking questions about race swapping in popular media, and we will address that later. But I'm not going to soil my pants because black people are a bridge too far in fantasy. If you're still with me, all of that is to say, welcome to a critique of the Witcher Netflix series, a deconstruction on television writing, fandom, diversity in media, and other things I am not qualified to talk about. So the way I will structure this video is something I learned in school, the compliment, or more accurately, criticism sandwich. The beginning and end of the video will be complimentary, what the show did right. The buns. The bulk of the video will be criticism, because at the end of the day, this is the internet, and we are here for an unmitigated shitload of toxic emotional bile and bad takes, right? So let's dive in, and take a bite of this delicious bun sandwich. What the show got right. To its credit, The Witcher did some things very well. First of all, Henry Cavill.
Well, duh! He's breathtaking.
When I first heard Cavill would be playing Geralt, like others, I was apprehensive. The only thing I knew him from was Man of Steel, which was but that's all I knew. And at the time, I thought he was too pretty or squeaky clean to play Geralt. Wow, I was wrong. Not only does Cavill do a great job of embodying the character as written for the show, he deeply cares about the franchise, including the books and games, and puts thought into the decisions as an actor as to what feels right for the character. In other words, he's a fucking nerd. I mean, he likes Warhammer and named his dog Kal. Like Kal-El? Superman's Kryptonian name? Speaking of Henry's Geralt, I feel that the Blaviken fight in Season 1, Episode 1 deserves its own special mention. Coordinated by Wolfgang Stegmann, this single-take fight is one of the best melee combat sequences I have seen in anything, hands down. It shows off the stylistic Witcher method of fighting and Geralt's inhuman speed and power, and it shows how he's able to completely dominate a fight against humans. Even with that reverse grip, which strictly speaking wouldn't be a great idea because it reduces your range of motion, but fuck it, rule of cool. Back to casting though. I'd say most of it is pretty well done. Freya Allan, Anya Chalotra, Joey Beatty are all perfect complements to Geralt and clearly work well with Cavill, and no matter what you think of the writing quality of the show, I'd say the actors hit their marks pretty well. Mayanna Buring, Emma Appleton, Kim Bodnia, Jodie May, Graham McTavish, and Eamon Farron nailed their roles, as far as what was given to them on the page. However, I'd like to see something more substantive for Anna Schafer and Mimi Ndwedi. We'll get into that later, but even with all the screen time or Netflix original storylines they've been given, the show can't seem to figure out what to do with them. The soundtrack. I'm a big fan of soundtracks, specifically the score. Original music written for the movie, show, or game, rather than licensed music. And while everyone goes nuts for Toss a Coin to Your Witcher, I gotta go with the deep cut here and say I'm partial to Fishmonger's Daughter.
Oh fishmonger, come quell your daughter's hunger. To hope on my horn, as it rises in the morn, for 'tis naught but bad luck to fuck where the path lets your grandkids be born, a hairy young fawn.
When I first played The Witcher 3, I knew it was unlike any other game I had played before, right away, because of the soundtrack. The theme of White Orchard is unique and memorable, with that lone wolf howl at the beginning of the track, the traditional instruments, and that buzzing Byzantine lyra. The composers Mikolai Struinsky and Marcin, along with the Witcher-inspired band Percival, captured a sound, if not immediately identifiable as Slavic to a North American ear, does set it apart from the likes of Skyrim or Lord of the Rings. Like Gustavo Santaolalla from The Last of Us or Bear McCreary for God of War, they were able to make a sound that is so intrinsic to the world, it is almost another character. Sonia Belasova and Jonas Ostinelli captured a similar aesthetic with their work. Extensive use of a hurdy-gurdy and different types of percussion and obvious passion really made a unique offering and enhanced the overall experience of watching the show. At least with the first season, that is. For the second season, and now confirmed for the third, Joseph Trapanese stepped in. I'm not shitting on Trapanese. He's got an extensive catalog of quality work that nobody could argue with. But I don't believe he really captured the essence of The Witcher. When I watched the second season, I realized over and over that I didn't remember the music at all. It was completely forgettable. Now maybe there were a fewer instances overall to feature the music on its own, like in Geralt's fight with Renfri's gang or with the Striga, but when I listened to the soundtrack, it mostly sounded too generic. And I couldn't really place it with any scene in the show. It didn't sound unique to The Witcher, just stock fantasy music for the most part. In the game Horizon Zero Dawn and its sequel Horizon Forbidden West, Joris de Man captured the aesthetic of the world, an ethereal blend of percussion and woodwinds and more primitive instruments and harsh synths and overpowering strings, mixing the world nature has reclaimed with the metal world of the past. Of course, I'm mainly speaking about the non-diegetic music, rather the music the characters in the story cannot hear. For the diegetic music, specifically Jaskier's ballads, I'd say they're roughly on par with the first season. Joey Beatty knocks his performance out of the park as usual, and Burn Butcher Burn is, as the kids say, a bap, a slap, bop, clomp? The soundtrack by Brian DeLiviera to the anime movie Nightmare of the Wolf, which we will talk about in more detail, on the other hand, is pretty goddamn solid. It sounds like its own thing, while very much still fitting the overall aesthetic of the Netflix series and sound. And the upcoming spin-off series Blood Origin will feature a soundtrack composed by Bear McCreary, which, even though I don't have much interest in the series itself, will probably be pretty awesome. Related, the sound design is pretty impeccable. I'll go back to the Blaviken scene again and again. When Geralt swings his sword and lands a strike, that sounds fantastic. Would a sword make a sound like that when you swing it? Probably not. But again, fuck it, rule of cool. Something really extraordinary is happening, and again, this scene uses something subtle like sound design to set Geralt apart from ordinary humans. The monsters sound pretty cool, and the screams and growls are all pretty interesting. Although, while we're on it, where's this guy drawing his sword from?
An ultimatum. Get it?
The logos. This might sound like a weird thing, but I really did like the design of the little stone or crystal logos that change every episode. It felt unique and fitting not just to the Netflix version of The Witcher, but felt at home in the franchise at large. It's a small thing, but I enjoyed it nonetheless. The cinematography. I don't know a lot about framing shots or creating beautiful scenery and having a world seem larger than what's on the screen, as though it continues beyond what we can see. But Jean-Philippe Gossart has done a fantastic job turning images and fictional places into pure art. Between him, the directors, colorists, and all the others that go into composing shots, you wind up with beautiful scenery like this. Okay, here's the not so good parts, and we're going to address them point by point, so here we go. Eskel. One of the biggest controversies of the second season was the decision to kill off Eskel. The whole episode and the circumstances surrounding it were a mess, so let's take it one issue at a time. Eskel is a witcher who makes his home at Kaer Morhen. According to the books, though he never reached the near celebrity status of Geralt, Eskel was his equal in skill and experience, as well as possessing a powerful magical aura, and the two are close friends. Other than being a kind, caring, and mature co-parent to Ciri, not a lot else can be said about him as far as the books go. He's a pretty minor character in Blood of Elves and doesn't appear again in the novels. I'd guess that most people who like Eskel are fans because of his heavily expanded role in the games. And how could you not be? Dude's a bro. But since the show is ostensibly an adaptation of the books, the Eskel we see in the games is not here, and in a vacuum, done right, I don't have a problem killing off Eskel. Unfortunately, we also don't have Eskel from the books. In the show, he's introduced when he arrives at Kaer Morhen, acts shitty to everyone for 10 minutes, and we're only given clumsy hints that he's not usually like this, then he up and fucking dies. The problem with killing him off in this manner is that the audience is given no emotional context for, or connection to his character. Why should anyone give a shit about him being killed just because the other characters say he's their buddy? Why would you be friends with this guy? He's an asshole, and only Geralt challenges him on it. Of course you're gonna piss people off. Book fans know him as a small but memorable character, game fans love him from his hugely expanded role, and show fans have no emotional context for this character and don't have an emotional stake in his death. In the following episode, we're given a brief flashback of Geralt having a friendly interaction with Eskel, but at this point, who cares? Don't now try to create meaning where there had been none before. The circumstances surrounding his death also create problems of their own, namely, hookers. Eskel brings a group of prostitutes that just happen to be nearby to party with the Witchers. Kaer Morhen is a dilapidated castle in the mountains in the middle of nowhere. Its precise location is also supposed to be a relative secret. These security concerns are waved off as these women have had plenty to drink and they won't remember where they are. Oh good, just send them off into the mountains in the winter after they've had a few so they can die of exposure. And weirdly, Vesemir of all people has no problem with this when he should have the most reason of any to disavow and disallow such a stupid move. Near a century ago, he experienced firsthand the repercussions of Kaer Morhen being well known as depicted in Nightmare of the Wolf. What are you doing? The third problem is the nameless red shirt Witchers. In the books, there are only a handful surviving. Geralt, Vesemir, Eskel, Lambert, and Cohen, who is a friend visiting from Povis. The show introduces a handful of other Witchers who do not appear in any other media. I didn't know their names, they don't do anything. Their only purpose?
What is my purpose?
You're gonna die.
Oh my god.
But wait, in the end of Nightmare of the Wolf, there are only 4 surviving children shown. Geralt from One Punch Man, Eskel, Lambert, and Remus, the Witcher who is killed by the Striga before Geralt takes on the contract in Season 1. And in Season 2, Geralt says to Ciri that the previous winter there were only 20 Witchers surviving at Kaer Morhen, and there are about a dozen when they arrive there. This time there's Geralt, Vesemir, Eskel, Lambert, Cohen, Everard, Gawain, Merrick, whoever the fuck they are, and a couple other nameless red shirts who exist only to be killed off in the last episode. Other than to die pointlessly because the audience has no emotional stake or connection to these characters, and them being alive in the first place does nothing to service the plot. They don't really do anything and are wiped out pretty quickly and violently by a kid with a knife.
Let me see what you have! A knife! No!
Or dinosaurs. The only thing they do is continue to violate Witcher lore by using weapons that aren't steel or silver swords, and drink potions that make them look creepy. Literally the same effect we see every time a Witcher uses a potion while having no other discernible effect. Why have them there? If you only have the Witchers that appear in the book, again, Geralt, Vesemir, Eskel, Lambert, and Cohen, it really underscores the in-universe adage that Witchers never die in their bed. That is, they live brutal, violent, short lives, and by reducing their numbers to a quarter in the space of a year. Oh, and half of them die in their bed. What is cool, though, is that we get a really nice scene of the other characters mourning their lost brothers.
Let's go.
And the rest.
Vesemir. Speaking of Vesemir, does he have any opinion in Season 2 that can't immediately be changed by even a slight disagreement? The Witcher Netflix is some of the best television ever made. I actually thought there were a lot of problems with it. You're right, I guess it's pretty terrible. I wouldn't say terrible, it's just a lot of missed opportunities and wasted potential. The Witcher Netflix series is some of the best television ever made. But seriously, for a nearly 200-year-old warrior, he has no backbone and constantly changes his mind. When Vesemir discovers that Ciri has Elder Blood, which apparently in this continuity is key to making more Witchers, which in itself makes zero sense, he decides that he's going to make more Witchers, his reason being that the Order is dying out, along with his surrogate sons, despite a number of flashbacks of screaming children, which in any other context would seem to be an argument against mutating more boys. But thanks to this weird writing, makes him want to do it? I guess? But Ciri then insists that he must try it on her first. He then refuses and stops his old plan. Then she insists further, and then he goes ahead with Ciri. Then Geralt arrives just in time to stop him, which Geralt shouldn't even know what Vesemir is doing because he has no context for what's happening because he was away, and then Vesemir stops and again gives up on his plan. Then in episode 8, Ciri is possessed by Voleth Mir. He resolves to protect her at Geralt's request, but he sees the other Witchers getting absolutely ganked by the basilisks, so then he leaves to go over and help. Then he sees them continue to die, so instead of helping stop the immediate threat to the nameless characters that he's so attached to, he turns around and tries to stop Ciri, even though she's just standing there looking all menacing. And he does this by attacking Geralt, his son, who stops him without even looking. Then he continues to watch Ciri do nothing while his other sons are getting slaughtered and while Geralt is occupied by the Great White Basilisk. Vesemir takes the opportunity to stab Ciri in the gut, but just once, which isn't even fatal for a normal human, and the wound is immediately healed by Voleth Mir. Does he have any personality? Like other things in this series, it's such a shame too, because the actor clearly really cares about the role and character.
I think Ardbeg would be the right answer.
That's my son!
Nightmare of the Wolf. I guess he has a personality in Nightmare of the Wolf. Swashbuckling badass with a sense of humor, devil-may-care attitude, and a fuckboy haircut. Where's your vape, Vesemir? I'll cover this really quickly because I want to focus on the main series, but for those who don't know, Nightmare of the Wolf covers Vesemir's childhood and becoming a Witcher, as well as the sacking of Kaer Morhen. Unlike the main series, it's an anime, which I realize is a bit of a misnomer, but that's how it's marketed, so that's what I'll call it. Alongside young Vesemir, it features a generic king who looks exactly like Vesemir, more Witchers who exist to die.
My name is Luca. I live on the second floor.
Bargain bin Yennefer, who gives a shit love interest, and a bunch of other stuff that violates the established lore and themes of the series overall, as well as inconsistencies in the Netflix canon. A lot of people who didn't particularly care for the main series really enjoyed this movie. I'm not one of them. And in the interest of glossing over a lot of things, let me just say I didn't feel the story or dialogue was very strong. The nuclear Ard canon was silly. I don't like the anime we can fly stuff, especially in the context of these characters being literally physically grounded. And what the fuck was the point of the grappling hook that we never see again?
That's all. One use.
As for violating its own internal canon, here are a few examples. Why is there no mention of Elder Blood being a key component to creating Witchers? If it is, where are they getting it? How does Vesemir immediately recognize a Leshen, or Leshy, in the Nightmare of the Wolf, even though it looks nothing like it does in the main series, which the writers hint that the reason they look nothing alike is because of the mutating and monster creation plot of the anime? Why does Vesemir say there are many ways to kill a Leshy, but only one way in Season 2, but then the actual Leshy gets killed by being split in half by a random monster. After that episode, my wife suggested that maybe it's not actually dead and will show up again a couple episodes later. Nope. It reminds me actually of this Far Side comic. You gotta do these specific things to kill a Leshy. Or this one thing. Or just cut it in half. The sacking of Kaer Morhen is the climax of Nightmare of the Wolf and is important to the lore. In the books, peasants and mages, whipped up by the xenophobia and fear, attack the castle, killing nearly all or all of the Witchers present, and the secrets of making more Witchers are lost. Now not only do you have the natural progression of Witchers dying due to occupational hazards, but now a bunch have been wiped out with no way to make more. This ties into the theme of The Witcher that can actually be summed up in the tagline of the first season, "The worst monsters are the ones we create," which is perfectly reflected in the first episode of the first season with Renfri, even if they had to cut a lot of the content related to that theme. So the most dangerous creatures aren't necessarily the Leshens or fiends or ghouls.
It turns out it's man.
Racial pogroms, wars, conflicts, and death, all driven by human fear and prejudice. What a concept. In the Netflix continuity, however, some rogue Witchers were breeding mutated monsters to ensure the survival of their order, which in a way justifies the distrust and dislike that Tetra had for them. In the sack of Kaer Morhen, the Witchers face off against Tetra peasants and monsters who have teamed up. Beau DeMayo, one of the writers for the main series and the writer of Nightmare of the Wolf, did an AMA on Reddit with this interesting point. Question: how did the humans unite with the monsters to attack Kaer Morhen? Weren't they just as afraid of monsters as much as Witchers? Answer: this is a valid question. I think it's a moment of we hate the Witchers more, but also mob mentality isn't necessarily logical. But it's a valid question that I honestly didn't think that much about it until people started to point it out. LOL.
While Dany kind of forgot about the Iron Fleet and Euron's forces.
I honestly didn't think that much about it. It about sums it up, doesn't it? Monsters. As long as we're on the subject of monsters, I thought the designs were kind of hit and miss. I really loved their take on the Striga in the first season and the overall horror aesthetic of that whole sequence. I quite like the looks of the Bruxa and the Hurricka, neither of which are revolutionary, but look perfectly suited to the series. The Chernobog was cool. The Sylvan Torque looks like something from Pan's Labyrinth, which, while it may not overall fit the look of The Witcher, I thought it was fine. Villain Trentemirth, the Gold Dragon, looks smooth. The Assassin's Bug Pet and Basilisk and Kikimora were fine, but here's where I get into the problem that I have. A lot of them I felt are really uninspired, and because they didn't have great ideas, they just said Monster Skullface. Kikimora, Skullface. Ghoul, Skullface. Random monster from Nightmare of the Wolf, Skullface. Plus red eyes. Swamp Bug, red eyes. Leshen, Skullface. Other Leshy, Skullface. Which sucks because it looks just like an evil Groot. And this is what we could have gotten according to the concept art. Way cooler, a similarity to the Witcher 3 Leshen, but different enough so that it's not copying. Most of the mutated monsters are boring and weird looking. Again, a bummer because the concept for the Griffin is way cooler than what we got for the mutated Griffin. I hated the little demon, the Mar, whereas the Witcher game monster designs almost universally felt unique, even with a tried and true monster type like a Griffin or a Hag. I felt a lot of these were kind of dull and uninspired. There were also a couple instances in Season 2 in which Geralt essentially uses Ciri as bait to draw out monsters, specifically the Leshy and the Chernobog. I'm not sure that fits their relationship very well, either as established in the books or the show thus far. Lauren addressed this on Twitter, saying that Geralt is confident enough in his abilities that he can kill them. You mean this Geralt? I cannot find it again. I know this exists somewhere, but I do recall Henry Cavill himself saying that Geralt has no easy fights. I know that exists in the world, but anyway. This is not to criticize Geralt or say that he's a shitty witcher, it's to underscore how good you have to be to effectively fight many different kinds of monsters. The reason he dominates most all human opponents is because of his inhuman speed of reflexes and strength, as well as his anatomical knowledge and ability to exploit weak points, opening veins and arteries on an enemy. The greatest boxers or MMA fighters of all time would destroy almost anybody on the street, but would still struggle against a tiger. Pacing. What's the difference between a good joke and a bad joke? Timing. Timing is everything. And in the context of a narrative story, that would be described as pacing. What sort of time frame is your story happening in? How quickly are you going from one plot point to the next? In addition to the context of within a single episode, this also applies to the overarching story. It can also mean the literal timing in the context of a story. For example, would it make sense for the events of the entire first Godfather to happen within the span of one night, rather than at least several months as depicted in the movie, or 10 years as depicted in the book? The timeline of the first season can be confusing. I read the book, so it was recognizable fairly quickly that these are 3 separate timelines that are slowly converging. It maybe could have been done better, but once you recognize it, the story makes way more sense. Pacing of the second season, however, is janky as shit. Yen and Cahir traveling from Gorsvellen to Oxenfurt via the sewers, which is possibly hundreds of miles, happens within the space of a night, maybe a couple hours if that. Then any Elvish refugees have to travel via boat from Oxenfurt to Sintra. Keep in mind that the distance from Vizima to Maribor is supposedly 200 miles. I don't have a direct quote on that, it's from the Witcher Wiki, but they're pretty good over there. Even if you cut that to a tenth at 20 miles, that would basically be a full day's travel on foot. The second season begins with Geralt and Ciri traveling to Nivelun's Manor in the first episode, then to Kaer Morhen by the beginning of the second episode. Then, all from episode 6 to 8, we pinball back and forth with Geralt and Ciri traveling to Nenneke's temple in Elander, to Sintra, and then doubling back, traveling thousands of miles with little to no acknowledgement of the distance passed. Why am I focusing so much on the travel? 2 reasons. 1, you have a fucking map. It's not like these are arbitrary distances like in The Simpsons. You, the show, have your own established map of where things are and vague distances between them. 2, it becomes a huge plot point later on. I don't want to potentially spoil anything for anyone, but it's fairly important that from Brokilon to Nilfgaard is roughly 4,000 miles. When distances don't matter and you can teleport without magic, when needed to serve a flimsy plot, what does it matter that you need to travel anywhere? Some defenders of the show will say, Blood of Elves is a lot of traveling and dialogue. Do you really want to watch that?
Yes.
So far, both seasons have been 8 episodes long, and I don't really see that changing now that it's been established, but I could be wrong. A lot of people have been saying that the 8-hour-long episodes is too compressed to allow the stories and characters to breathe and develop, with sections feeling super rushed. A point I agree with. For example, let's look at one of the best shows currently on TV, and in my opinion, one of the best ever made. Bill Hader plays a former Marine turned hitman who takes an interest in an acting class. It's a tragicomedy, and just from its concept, doesn't sound like it should be as good as it is. Just having finished airing its 3rd season, Barry is able to elicit gut laughs, deep and disturbing emotion, awkward tense comedy, and horrific violence while fleshing out believable, flawed, and hilarious characters, all in 8 episodes per season that clock in at 30 minutes each. Granted, Barry is an original story rather than an adaptation of a series of novels, and is able to deal with a much tighter cast rather than an entire new world and a massive group of characters. But that's also the difference between HBO and Netflix. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of it has to do with Netflix itself, rather than any of the show staff. I know with most network TV, the channel or distributor orders a certain number of episodes. Networks can also demand that episodes leave on cliffhangers and the general feel of the show that supersedes the showrunner. I'm not sure how it works with premium cable and streaming, but it is possible that the powers that be at Netflix demanded 8 episodes. Given more time and more adherence to the source material, I think you could let things breathe a little more. My evidence for that is their own pitch guide, which details 8 episodes. Broccolon and the Dryads. In Season 1, Ciri escapes from Cintra and ends up fleeing to Broccolon Forest. Now, I didn't rewatch Season 1 before making this, so maybe I'm missing some stuff here, but again, look at the distance. Hundreds of miles at least, and she wandered there mostly on her own? Okay. Broccolon is a deep, primeval forest occupied by the Dryads, an entirely female race of humanoid beings who are forest guardians. They are magical in nature and have a deep connection to Broccolon, able to communicate with nature in a way no others can. In the books, they wield solely bows and spears, clothe themselves very lightly, if at all. They hold the trees as very sacred and will not harm them. So naturally, when receiving the waters of Broccolon, they cut the tree with a metal knife to drain it out. In the show, you see them wielding crossbows and other metal weapons that requires technology they do not have, and despite being extremely aggressive to any outsiders, and in an episode stating that they make everyone drink the waters of Broccolon to uncover any ill intentions, they let fake Mousesack in without making him drink, which would uncover he's an evil Doppler. Also, the show just makes them seem like a different, albeit very isolationist culture, rather than being an entirely different species. Everybody's already touched on the initial meeting between Ciri and Geralt being removed, thus lessening the emotional impact of their meeting, so I won't get into that. Is that nitpicky? Yes. You want something more petty? Let's get nitpicky. Nitpicks. Did Ciri stop at H&M for this fur vest? Why did all these guys freeze at the same time? I hate the way they say Melitele. While I can't say for certain that the game pronunciation is correct, it sounds like a shitty British phone company. Ciri casts a fast travel spell by screaming fuck. If that worked in real life, I'd never miss a bus. Uh-oh. Wall of this captured city just broke. Better send 5 guys. Hey Netflix, it's not a shout out to ham-fistedly reference the material you're supposedly directly adapting. That's just doing your job. I hate this reveal of Emhyr. Not that it happened, just this scene. In the books, it actually happens much, much later, pretty much right after the climax in the last novel. But fair enough, you only get the reveal that Duny and Emhyr are the same person at the end, but you have scenes of Emhyr and Nilfgaard. That's easier in books because you can even describe them similarly, but unless you explicitly say they're the same, you can get away with it. So having the reveal this early on is acceptable. While I don't overall like the addition of the monoliths to the story, fine, whatever. Let it happen. What I don't accept is that inside the medallion tree in Kaer Morhen, which itself is a cool addition, is a small monolith. Inside the tree, upon which are hung medallions that detect magic, is a powerful magical relic. The monolith and tree, which likely predate the Witchers who now inhabit the fortress of Kaer Morhen, and they didn't know it was there? Really? Season 1. Nilfgaard has ugly, stupid, and impractical armor. because they are an army of conscripts like most medieval armies, and indeed much of the Northern Kingdom's armies would be as well, so they are a massive ragtag force from several countries and kingdoms because it's an empire. So somehow they have matching uniforms. Nilfgaard conquers one small kingdom, then loses a decisive battle in a war, and a few days later in Season 2, the entire army has upgraded to full plate armor. Okay. In the books, the elves formulate a somewhat tense alliance with Nilfgaard. In exchange for helping the war effort against the northern kingdoms, Emperor Emhyr promises to return a kingdom to them, Dol Blathanna, the Valley of the Flowers. It was held by the elves until about 100 years previous, where after humans booted them out and elves fled to the mountains. The ones who remain are starving and homeless. This is mostly the case in the show as well. However, the elves seem to talk about Dol Blathanna as if it's some kind of metaphorical promised land. But Filavandrel was in Dol Blathanna in Season 1. The Edge of the World with Torquay the Sylvan takes place there. I had to look this up, but apparently in the show, their caves are infested with monsters, so they have to find a new Dol Blathanna. I don't know why they added this extra bit when the region is held by violent and prejudiced humans. Works. It's why they left. It's not like they enjoyed living in caves. By taking the northern kingdoms, Emhyr would in theory have the power to hand that state back to them. Why overcomplicate it and then dumb down so much else? I'm sorry, but this is a bit book spoilery, but can be ascertained by watching the second season. Emhyr doesn't actually care about the plight of elves. He's a cunning tactician and is using the elves as a wedge to break apart the north. The northern kingdoms, while ostensibly the protagonists of the war, are guilty of horrible crimes and state-sponsored genocide. Nilfgaard, the evil invaders, massacre the people of the northern kingdoms while championing the oppressed elves, but they are just a political tool. As long as we're on the subject of elves. Durmain. Let's talk about Durmain. Durmain is an elf who appears in Season 2, Episode 4, Redanian Intelligence. He and another elf, Balian, are northern refugees who meet Yen and Cahir in the sewers beneath Gor's Velen on their way to the Sandpiper in Oxenfurt in search of safe passage to Sintra. Durmain and the actor who plays him, Jamal Ajala, are deaf. Let me be clear about something. I am very much in favor of deaf actors playing deaf characters and seeing more of them in popular media. Marlee Matlin and the girl from A Quiet Place can't play them all. This 100% ties into the exact same points I will make later about seeing more people of color in popular media, so take all those things I'm going to say and put them here as my caveats. With all that said, I cannot tell you how much I hate this entire sequence. First, we're led to believe that these sewers, or ancient elven aqueducts, stretch for what, hundreds of miles underground beneath Temeria and under a river to another city completely? And they walk that in the span of a single night? Yeah, how can we get the elves to replace the fucking Dees Island Tunnel? That's a super local reference, and unless you're in the lower mainland of British Columbia, I apologize. Then we have a few minutes of screen time over this episode devoted to these characters traipsing through the muck, and just when it looks like they're about to get out of the sewers to relative safely, Durmain takes this opportunity to explain at length to Yen how he loves her and how they'd build a beautiful life together, and then exactly what the fuck you knew was gonna happen, happens.
You keep eating them hotlings, you're never gonna make it to a pension.
Come on, live a little, Scoy.
No, thank you. Got me a future, partner. I'm 2 days away from retirement. My daughter's graduating from college.
Little Susie's growing up.
And as soon as we nail Mendoza, my old lady and I are gonna sail around the world like we always wanted. We just christened the boat. Oh, yes, sir. Everything's gonna be just Damn. McBain.
Yes?
I'm not gonna make it.
Oh, stop talking crazy.
No. Just do one thing for me. Get Mendoza.
Mendoza!
And Dermain was just 2 days away from retirement. And here we come to the crux of my point about this scene in particular, and a lot of this season in general. This scene served zero purpose. We're force-fed emotion about a character we have no connection to, told we should care about this through ham-fisted display, followed by an extremely predictable death to a character who had no impact on the story, as if this would demonstrate the brutality of the world they live in, but we've already seen better examples. This is nothing. This is going to sound harsh, but I would be embarrassed to have written that. A lot of advocates for disability were thrilled with the prospect of a deaf character and actor in a large franchise like The Witcher, only for him to be killed off 5 minutes later. You know how you could make that very same scene impactful? Here's how you do it. Very easily. Switch the deaths. Kill Balian instead. Balian is able to communicate with Dermain because they know their sign language, but Yen and Cahir do not. That inherently creates conflict. The characters who are depending on one another to survive don't understand each other. In the scene as it happens, Balian leaves Dermain to his fate as it becomes clear that Dermain cannot be saved. Though after being shamed by Yen, he's racked with guilt and later sacrifices himself at the docks to guarantee passage onto a boat bound for Sintra. If instead Balian signed to Dermain to leave him as he was being dragged into the water by the Zeugle, which only happened because Dermain had to stop the crew for his little story, there's a lot more emotional depth and understanding of the guilt that the other elf might feel.
I'm doing the best at this.
And as long as we're talking about shit that doesn't matter, it doesn't matter that the website and presumably the script chose to call this sewer monster a Zeugle because we only see tentacles and not the monster itself. It's just another cheap afterthought in reference to an enjoyable moment in the books that's been butchered and bereft of its original context. Dara. I cannot for the life of me make sense of Dara's plotline or why they've chosen to devote so much screen time to him. Dara is a Netflix original character who Ciri met in the first season while on the run after the sack of Sintra. He helped Ciri out of a couple of binds, like escaping from Jacobi from the Doppler, known as the Adonis. But eventually he discovers that she's the granddaughter of Queen Calanthe, whose xenophobic policies led to the death of Dara's family, leaving him an orphan. At some point between season 1 and 2, he's imprisoned by the Redanians, but sprung from prison when Dijkstra, the head of Redanian intelligence, determines he can be of use to spy on their behalf in Sintra, which has since become a safe haven for elves. Dara then has to book passage on his own, thanks for the assist Dijkstra, through the mysterious Sandpiper, and then arrives in Sintra and promptly begins reporting on the goings-ons of the refugee elves. Quick question. Why? What is Dara's motivation for spying? Dijkstra has nothing to threaten Dara with. His family's dead, so they can't be held hostage. Dara's essentially a kid, so there's no dirt on him. Once he's in a safe place, can't he just get an audience with Francesca, herself a very powerful sorceress, and say, hey, an owl is making me spy on you for Redania? As far as Francesca and Filavandrel know, the first pureblood elven baby born in a century was just murdered because of Dara, and they just like, don't worry, it's not your fault. Really? Then Francesca and her whole crew just traipse into Tretogor, I think, completely uncontested, and again, coming immediately from Sintra on a whim, and then she accidentally all the babies. Dara served a function, albeit debatable if it was truly necessary in the first season. The second season, as far as I'm concerned, he contributed no interesting scenes or relevant story material. Diverse casting. Okay, we're going to talk about it, and it's going to be pretty long, I'm warning you now, so if this discussion just simply doesn't interest you, skip to the next section, but please know, I did my homework and you'll be hurting my feelings. According to the internet, Heimdall is a fictional character appearing in the American comic books published... Jesus Christ, god damn you, Marvel! Disney produces a horde of seizure-inducing green-screen popcorn movies. Suddenly every depiction of Loki has horns. He just looks like a regular god. Heimdall is a somewhat mysterious figure in Norse mythology and plays a key role in warning Asgard about the incoming invasion of Jotun, or giants, at the onset of Ragnarok, the Norse apocalypse. He stands watch on the Rainbow Bridge Bifrost and possesses Gjallarhorn, a beacon which can be heard in all realms. He's also described as the whitest of the gods. So naturally, instead of Weird Al from White and Nerdy, or a floating outfit consisting of boat shoes and khaki shorts and a polo on a yacht named the Manifest Destiny, they cast coolness personified. Makes sense. To be expected, there were cries of political correctness. Seriously, who says that anymore? Going too far, disrespect to the source material. You wouldn't see Brad Pitt in Wakanda. Sure you would. He'd be there with Angelina adopting kids. A lot of medieval fantasy casting that is diversified beyond anything but 100% white people gets this sort of treatment. Just look at the reactions to the Amazon Lord of the Rings series. And while these kinds of books, shows, etc. tend to have more of a basis in medieval Europe, it is important to remember they are works of fiction. Why is every character British? However, one could make the argument that Norse mythology is part of the old cultural roots of a people who still exist. Because it's true. Go to Iceland, you'll meet guys named Thor. So I could understand if you don't love seeing someone who isn't of that descent playing a bastardized comic version of a cultural figure. But let me ask you this. Are you as pissed off when Anthony Hopkins plays Odin? Or an Australian plays Thor? You think Stringer Bell taking his turn as Heimdall is bad? Australia doesn't even exist. Race swapping is eye-rolling at worst. If it ruins your day, there's something else going on. If it doesn't lend itself to believable world building, however, I get that it takes you out of the show. Let's pick an example, almost at random. Bridgerton is another Netflix original based on Julia Quinn's series of novels of the same name taking place in London during the Regency era. That would be about 1811 to 1820. One reason Bridgerton made waves, other than a central conceit of the story wherein the male love interest promised his father he would never make cumsies in a lady, is the conscious casting of black actors in several roles, nearly equal in number to white actors. This is primarily based on the theory that Queen Charlotte of Mecklenburg, who died in late 1818, may have been of sub-Saharan African descent, typically what we think of when we say black, or Moorish, a loosely defined group of indigenous North Africans, or Mozarab, Christianized inhabitants of the Iberian Peninsula. This idea was first proposed by J. A. Rogers in 1940 and subsequently popularized by Mario de Valdez y Cocom nearly 60 years later, and is generally pretty tenuous and mostly seen as pop culture. In all fairness, Bridgerton is not a documentary. It does not pretend to be historically accurate, fucking playing Ariana Grande for fuck's sake, and it's basically an alternate universe. Therefore, Queen Charlotte is played by Golda Rosheuvel, who I'm sure crushes it. I watched a little bit of Bridgerton. It's not for me. Not everything needs to be. The problem where we run into world building comes into play here. Showrunner Chris Van Dusen explained that Queen Charlotte was added into the show as she wasn't in the books to explain how this ethnic diversity came to pass, using her position to raise up others, handing out lands, dukedoms, and power. So you're telling me the British monarchy, whose very existence, like all nobility, is predicated on the idea of bloodlines blessed by God and the idea of strategic marriage and inbreeding to retain power, a monarchy which has existed in one form or another for about 1500 years, that is no stranger to violent oppression, whose merchants were a driving force behind the Atlantic slave trade, where slavery was not officially abolished until 1833, you're telling me this whole time we were just a few Yas Queen moments away from equity? There have been some black people who have been critical of Bridgerton, having primarily cast light-skinned black people into positions of power. I ain't gonna touch that. That's not my fight. I don't know enough, and it's not my place to talk about that. So let's loop back around to The Witcher, because that is what I'm supposed to be talking about, and not Irritable Nobody tells you his opinions about stuff that's not The Witcher. Some defenders will argue that teleportation in The Witcher could very easily establish the ethnic mix of the actors and characters, even though it is established in the lore that teleportation is neither easy nor mundane, and it definitely can't be used to move huge quantities of people as would be needed to facilitate the demographics that we see in the show. This is also a plotline for later in the series as relates to Ciri, but I don't want to spoil that too far ahead. There's also an argument that I find very disingenuous, where people will say that there were people of color in Europe. Nobody with any sense is arguing that it didn't happen. The argument being made is that people of color would not be the norm, that the norm would be closer to our broad modern definition of white, which I will talk about in greater detail in a bit. They would be traveling merchants, dignitaries, nobles, or mercenary groups, and would still be seen as foreign. There's no reason that a medieval backwater village in England would have the same diversity as modern New York. I do also laugh at articles like this saying The Witcher is better than Game of Thrones because of the diversity of its cast. Well, it's not better in ratings, writing, or social relevance. That being said, I'm quite fine with the diverse casting in The Witcher that we've seen. For instance, the Nilfgaardian Empire encompasses an enormous amount of land, as do the collective northern realms of Redania, Temeria, Kedwen, Edirn, and a couple of others. It's not unbelievable that there would be non-white people in the mix across those thousands and thousands of miles. It could also be said that as humans rise on the continent centuries after elves, dwarves, gnomes, and other fantasy races, rather than evolving here via the magical phenomenon known as the conjunction of the spheres, it's not implausible that humans come from a world where they were already mixed. All of that would be acceptable. The continent, the landmass on which the Witcher stories take place, is very inspired by medieval Poland and Slavic cultures, with flavors of Celtic, Germanic, and other European cultures blending in. It is not set in medieval Poland. I'm reading these dogshit clickbait websites, so you don't have to. With that explanation, it's also not unreasonable to expect the characters to be depicted as majority white like they were in the games, or in the original Polish TV series Wiedźmin. I'm fucking up the pronunciation, I know. Europe is where white people are grown, after all. And if you were to look at medieval Poland, it would look vaguely like what we consider to be white. But let's take a way big step back.
And literally fuck your own face!
How do you not love that fucking movie? Let's take a big step back and examine the broader terms that we use to describe ethnicity, that we take for granted. The concept of race to differentiate one group of people from another is only about 500 years old, and the idea of saying white people first came in about 1613 when England was colonizing India. Another 50 years pass and white becomes contrasted with black and other less savory terms used in the colonies of America, and while it has evolved and shifted in the centuries since, that's more or less where we are today. Extremely broad terms to vaguely differentiate you from me. However, if you were to look back at medieval times, you wouldn't see differentiation in terms like that. You would find in medieval times, for instance, extremely narrow designations, more along the lines of the region that they were from, your choice of roast chicken or fish, Pepsi and flagons, and the hottest queen in all the land. Or even further back, the Romans viewed people as either Roman or not Roman. The term Slav, as best as I can tell, comes from the Byzantine scholar Procopius, identifying early Slavic people using the word sporoi. After Procopius, Slav was used as an ethnonym to describe those people who conquered modern Moldova and Ukraine and so on. The accepted etymology of the English word slave is that it comes from a time when Slavs were taken captive by Germanic peoples in the moors of Spain and sold, though there are those who challenge that theory. And what constitutes Slavic is very broadly Eastern European, which historically is heavily influenced by the rise and fall of the Greek, Roman, and Frankish empires, cultures surrounding the Mediterranean and Baltic seas, as well as the nomadic Huns, who themselves were vaguely from the Eurasian steppe. That is a huge swath of land that stretches from Hungary to Manchuria, and even further back, Slavic, Germanic, Celtic, Italic, and Indo-Iranian languages all belong to a family called Indo-European languages. The further back you go, doesn't this all seem so fucking stupid? I think I understand the need for diverse representation in media. Personally, in my own experience, I've never felt represented by a character in a movie or show because they were of similar ethnicity to me. However, being born and raised in North America and our media landscape, it could be that I don't notice it until it's pointedly missing, because it's sort of the default. Our broad term of white that we have today is the majority population. Therefore, I'm able to see past that to the content of what's being presented. And I can't discount those who say they feel represented, seeing someone who looks like them in a movie or TV show and the feeling it gave them. I can't decide that for others. Who am I to argue? A well-rounded and deeply fleshed out character who's played by an actor who's Chinese or Brazilian or black or whatever is good for everyone. And I will always defend a meritocracy. If a diverse group of different ethnicities prove to be the best actors, that's really all you need to say. I want the best performances from the people most suited to the role. The most important factor is, are your characters and story fleshed out, well-rounded, consistent, well-written? In this instance, my opinion is no. Everything else is a distraction. The fandom. As I mentioned above, the audience reaction to the show has been extremely polarizing. 1, because this is the internet, it's a shithole. 2, there's a built-in audience. Anytime you are adapting an existing IP to another medium, you anticipate them coming along to check out your project. Of course, if you're Peter Jackson or Steven Spielberg or Greta Gerwig or, more relevant, CDPR, you see something vital in the work you're adapting. But it's quite likely fans of the Witcher books will be drawn intrinsically to the Witcher games, as well as attracting new fans, right? Right. So presumably the Netflix series wants to attract fans of the books and games, and new fans. What seems to be happening here is that the series is attracting a different sort of base than the books and games in general. There are cross fans who like 1, 2, or all 3 of these versions. It's also worth saying that just because you like the books or games doesn't mean you're cool or in the right here. I've seen plenty of rank shit in fan communities. For instance, when Jinx released a Witcher hoodie, they used a black man to model it, and there were comments saying some racist shit because it was a black guy. And their random internet venom is not limited to Netflix or hoodies. Just look at what happened when CDPR posted rainbow flags at the beginning of June for Pride Month, or how they interact with other people on Twitter. Fuck them. And by the way, I know those are book and game fans. What's interesting is the Netflix series seems to be attracting a Tumblr-esque fan group. People who tweet shit like "We stand Tisaya" or "We ship Geralt x Yaskir" or "Yen being iconic." Because it's Netflix, you reach a broader base than video games. There are a lot of people who simply do not participate in gaming, and you don't have an algorithm-based platform the size of Netflix who also writes books and recommends them to you. I'm not certain that's the audience that was originally into the books and games, speaking very generally. So I think that can explain why there's a lot of clash in the opinions of the audience. There's also a strange phenomenon, and I'm gonna try to explain what I mean here, but I almost can't. It's this weird propensity for audiences, and to be clear, audiences are who I'm mainly talking about here, but the same could be said for professional critics. But it's this habit to say, I love this show a lot, it was a lot of fun, it wasn't very good, but I liked it. And I've seen it repeatedly. I screen capped a few of them, and again, I get it, they're not professional critics. Even though a lot of time critics get shit wrong, there is something positive to be said, and they provide a legitimate insight into art, be it TV, movies, books, paintings, music, comedy, whatever. There are also perfect scores, 10 stars, 5 out of 5. Really? Again, I don't want to shit on people for liking what they like, but it's almost like, do we watch the same thing? Recently, I put up a little Google Doc survey seeking specifically people who hadn't read the books or played the games, and some of you suck at reading, but that's okay. It was pretty interesting, the response I got. Some were unhelpful dicks, some were very interesting to read. Some can't identify theme, which I think is interesting because it's not exactly subtle, and some were really fascinating, especially this responder with regards to bisexuality. I'll post the locked survey and screenshots, and you can peruse the answers yourself. On an episode of Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, Christoph Waltz said something very smart that I happen to agree with.
Cigars is one of these things. It's a little bit like I feel about comedy. It has to be exquisite to be good. If it's any less, you might as well skip it.
Some might say that's elitist, but when it comes to art, creative endeavors, I don't think so. Life's too short to absorb hours and hours of mediocrity, and I understand that not everything can be There Will Be Blood or Golden Girls or Key and Peele or Taxi Driver. I understand that there always will be shows like Blue Bloods or Riverdale. People like garbage, but Jesus fucking Christ, who has time for that shit? By the way, everybody's saying The Witcher has CW quality writing. Until I hear Geralt say jingle jangle unironically with such fear and gravitas, I disagree.
Who brought the jingle jangle to?
Neither of us run jingle jangle.
Drugs dealing jingle jangle.
On jingle jangle.
They're jingle jangle.
On jingle jangle. Jingle jangle.
Jingle jangle.
The jingle jangle.
My frustration is simply, man, this could have been so much better. There are a few more criticisms to levy, many of which were not written out by me, and honestly this is long enough as it is, so I'll include screenshots of those comments that I thought were really interesting in the description, and you can go have a look at those yourself. The second bun. Yeah, that was pretty long, wasn't it? How do we salvage it from here? Like this? I really appreciate the cast and crew of The Witcher. Even the writers, honestly, nobody wants to make a bad show. Nobody. And it takes a ton of work to make even the shittiest of shows happen. It's a monumental amount of work and effort, and I applaud them for trying and succeeding where they do. I also really like Lauren Schmidt-Hissrich's dedication to communicating with fans and detractors on Twitter. You know, Twitter, that wonderful website renowned for its ability to facilitate really productive conversations. I don't think it's a sign of a bad writer to explain the choices behind your work and your thought process and motivation. Now, maybe if you have to explain plot elements or say things like, you really have to read the novels to get the full picture, then that's shitty writing, Star Wars. But if you love what you do, why would you not want to talk about it and engage with people who want to talk to you about it? Hopefully this show can do something for its actors like Game of Thrones did for Emilia Clarke or Kit Harington. I truly hope that we get to see more of Anya Chalotra, Joey Beatty, Freya Allen, of course, Henry Cavill, and I look forward to seeing what more they have to offer. Season 3 is in production now, so we're not expecting much of anything till towards the end of the year, and I'll give it a chance, even if a bit guarded. But please, Netflix, feel free to prove me wrong. Hey kids, here's some leftover jokes!
This is not meth.
The fandom.
Now, at the risk of being unpopular, this reporter places the blame for all of this squarely on you, the viewer.
The fandom.
You know what really grinds my gears? You. Fuck you!
Reince Priebus.
Legs, Louis, advance on them.